Okay, so now officially we are starting the second day of the session, and we are starting this day with another legend, another exceptional speaker, Mr. Jakub Jaraczewski. We've met during one of the seminars, and Jakub was telling about National Council of Judiciary in Poland using very interesting comparisons, so I'm really looking forward to what he's gonna present today. And what's also important, so he's the guy who's tweeting about Polish Constitutional Tribunal, or so-called Polish Constitutional Tribunal. He's doing it on Twitter. He's having his live coverage of the hearings, or so-called hearings, in the Constitutional Tribunal, and he's having thousands of followers. So he's a guy who can tell the story about the rule of law, about the prosecutors, about the judges, I think about everything. So Jakub Jaraczewski from DRI International, or just DRI. Just DRI. Jakub Jaraczewski.
Thank you very much, Jarek, for this fantastic introduction. And first of all, I would like to express my happiness at being here together with prosecutors from Poland and all over the region. In my work, and I will tell just in a moment a little bit more about my organization and what exactly we do, I have had some occasional opportunity to engage with prosecutors, but not that much. So I'm very happy for this event because this is my another chance to work with this awkward microphone, which hopefully will be successful. But most importantly, this is my opportunity to engage with you, with prosecutors, and to listen to what you have to say, and hopefully be able also to tell you a couple of interesting things about freedom of assembly and association of prosecutors. So thank you very much for being here, and very much thanks to Jarek and the INPRIS Foundation for organizing this, for holding this event at this extremely important time, both in Poland and in the European Union as a whole. We are witnessing the attempts to restore the rule of law in Poland, which have so far focused more on the judiciary side, but inevitably sooner or later we will also see draft laws and proposals to deeply reform the prosecution services in Poland as well. But also beyond Poland, we are at unprecedented times. The rule of law crisis in several EU member states is progressing and unfortunately not getting better. The situation in Slovakia is getting worse and worse, and in particular with regards to prosecutors. So I think this is very important that we have this kind of opportunity to meet and discuss, and these events are taking place. So thank you very much, Jarek. And I will now draw upon our agreement that you will be my slides assistant, so that we will be able to show you a couple of things. But first of all, the topic of my presentation was scheduled to be prosecutors and freedom of expression and assembly, key standards and rulings. But from what I heard yesterday, a lot of those key rulings have been already brought up and discussed in a way. Kövesi versus Romania, Baka versus Hungary. So I decided to a little bit adjust. And given also the time frame, I wanted to focus on a couple of maybe less known judgments from the European Court of Human Rights, which have important consequences for prosecutors. And then, of course, mention the key landmark cases that have the most impact on what currently the European Court of Human Rights has to say about prosecutors and their freedom of expression and assembly. So hopefully this will be things that will be interested for you, and things that you hopefully heard about but maybe wanted to know a little bit more. Dear assistant, thank you very much. So first of all, yes, this is the outline of our session. A bit about myself and my organization, maybe. I represent Democracy Reporting International. We are an NGO/think tank based in Berlin. However, we work worldwide. We currently have offices around the globe, including in places such as Beirut, Kinshasa, and Kyiv, where we recently reopened our office and we returned to Ukraine after some time of not being there. Our organization has for a long time worked primarily on democracy and democratic participation in processes. However, inevitably with time we started expanding. And since 2018 in particular, we are working on the rule of law in the European Union under a project called Reconstitution, which is supported by a German foundation, Stiftung Mercator. And the aim of this project, or at least our part of work in this project, is to engage with policymakers, journalists, and professionals to help strengthen the public debate on the rule of law in the European Union. And we work with many different people. We've been engaging with judges, we've been engaging with practical lawyers, but this is the first time an opportunity to engage almost exclusively with prosecutors. And I'm again very glad for this, because this is a professional group which we have kind of not engaged as much as we wished we could in so far, so I'm double happy for this opportunity, because prosecutors too have an extremely important role to play in the rule of law crisis, and especially their ability, their freedom to express themselves and to speak up about what's happening around them is one of the key elements here. So I'm very happy that we will be able to talk about this. I put on my slide the two words which already got used probably too much yesterday, so I will try to briefly, mercifully, I will hope not to use them too much, which is mutatis mutandis, because a lot of things which we will be talking about are standards and court rulings and situations that pertain to judges and are applicable mutatis mutandis to prosecutors, but I decided to spice it up and bring up one judgment of the European Court of Human Rights, which is not about a judge and does not have anything to do, well, primarily with judiciary, but will be applicable mutatis mutandis. So hopefully this is going to bring some variety to this conversation. But yes, I want to focus on three less famous rulings of the European Court of Human Rights, Wille, Bricht, and Kudeshkina. And moving from that, I will talk also about the two big ones, which already probably got a lot of attention from you yesterday, Kövesi versus Romania and Żurek versus Poland. But I will try to focus on a little bit less obvious aspects of those. And then I hope to have some discussion about the freedom of assembly, freedom of association of prosecutors, because this is something what probably gets talked a little bit less in this conversation. There is a lot of rulings about freedom of expression of prosecutors, a lot of rulings about the right to fair trial of prosecutors who are being attacked or disciplined over their speech. But when it comes to joining various forms of association and acting in this association, this is an underdeveloped area. And I think there is some interesting things to be discussed here about when, how, where can the prosecutors join with others and participate in some organizations of various kinds. Time pertaining, we will have a very short case study to discuss over. I know that you will have more extensive hypotheticals, as they have been named in the agenda, later on, but I hope that I will have time to get the ball rolling with a short one. And finally, hopefully, a space for Q&A and comments. We will see how we go about this, depending on how our discussion will move forward. So, what was my inspiration for this presentation? My inspiration for this presentation was the man on the picture. This is a man whom probably some of you know. It's Polish prosecutor, Seweryn Borek. And Mr. Borek, a prosecutor with an illustrious long career in prosecution services in Poland, has been recently on the panel tasked with selecting the candidate for the national prosecutor in Poland. National prosecutor, so the deputy prosecutor general. After a change of the government, the new government declared that they want to have an open competition for this position. Panel of experts has been assembled, and this panel of experts has held hearings for the candidates. Those hearings have been broadcasted online. They're available on YouTube. This was also a very nice example of transparency and a change from the practices of the previous government, that this competition was made public, that you could see those candidates be interrogated by the panel, asked questions, answering them, and so on. And Prosecutor Borek started his speech with saying a very interesting thing. He said, I want to apologize. I want to sprinkle ash on my head because for a long time I thought that prosecutors should not speak up, that prosecutors should not express themselves publicly, especially on social media, that the prosecutors should rely on the services of the prosecutor office, on the press officers. This should be the channels of public communication. And I thought that this is enough. But now, after everything that happened in Poland over the last 8 years, after the 8 years of the rule of law crisis, and after 8 years of destruction of the rule of law by the previous government, I can see that this is no longer the case, that the prosecutors need to be able to speak up and react, that everything that has happened, that challenges such as disinformation and misinformation, challenges such as the fact that communication online comes at such speed that it is faster than the usual media cycle, all of this means that prosecutors should speak up and they should participate in the public conversation directly, simply grabbing their phone or laptop and reacting and dispelling myths and protesting. And he sincerely apologized for a view which I think is still strong with many people in prosecution and judiciary in Poland and not just in Poland. This is the view that those public servants, those specific kinds of public servants, should not be visible and not be outspoken, that they should only speak through their decisions, judgments, or decisions of the prosecutor. And an occasional situation where some kind of engagement with public sphere is necessary, this should be done to press officers of a court or a prosecutor's office. I am afraid that this view is no longer possible to be reconciled with the reality. And I agree with Prosecutor Borek that this new situation calls for prosecutors and judges to speak up. But of course, the question is, how should prosecutors and judges speak up? And I would like to start with talking a little bit about standards. And of course, you all know the European Convention on Human Rights, you know the key documents, but I wanted to bring up two maybe less known documents which speak about specifically about prosecutors and their freedom of expression of assembly. So no mutatis mutandis here. This is a document which was adopted on the beautiful country of Cuba, in its capital of Havana, in 1990 by the United Nations. It was adopted during one of the high-level conferences on criminal law and procedure. And there, the assembled experts representing various governments, prosecutors' associations, and the United Nations human rights system, so members of the UN treaty bodies and so on, have gathered to elaborate guidelines on the role of prosecutors. So to 1919, 34 years ago, before the internet. Okay, internet existed at the time, but was limited to universities, maybe military, and the government at best, was not widely available. And they have elaborated guidelines, and those guidelines still remain to this day. They hang on the UN website. You can find them. You come to this website, you think that this is something very modern, but those guidelines come from another time. In a way, they are still very much relevant. They talk about entitlement to freedom of expression and association of prosecutors, to right to partake in public discussion on matters concerning law, administration of justice, human rights, and doing that without suffering disadvantages and being attacked over this. And of course, mentioning that in exercising those rights, prosecutors should conduct them in accordance with the law and standards of the ethics, and that prosecutors should be free to form and join professional associations and other organizations to promote their professional training and to protect their status. So this is a guideline which is in many ways still relevant, but it's coming from a different era. It's not just the fact that the internet was not widespread back then, but also the fact that internet has fundamentally transformed the way we live and we act and the public debate. So this is coming from a time where in many ways information did not flow as fast as it does today. And the information was not as easy to be distorted because the transmission of public debate to the society was still done exclusively almost by professional media, newspapers, televisions, radio stations. So there was this kind of barrier between what was happening and the information that reached the public. This barrier does not, it still exists, but it's much more weakened. Most people get their information from social media and frequently from unreliable and unprofessional sources. So these are guidelines which still hold some relevance, but they come from another time and another place. But you would think that over the last 34 years, things have changed significantly as the technology society evolved and new challenges appeared, but that is not exactly the case. Thank you very much. These are far more recent standards adopted by the Consultative Council of European Prosecutors, working as part of the Council of Europe, and so promulgated by the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, so also a high-level document. And European norms and principles concerning prosecutors, again, a set of non-binding guidelines, which have been developed in order to help prosecutors across the Council of Europe, member states. But in this context, there is not much difference because both UN and Council of Europe operate on a similar set of standards when it comes to freedom of expression and assembly. And those guidelines highlight that prosecutors enjoy the right to freedom of association, and in communications between prosecutors and the media, that the following principles should be respected: the presumption of innocence, the right to private life and dignity, the right to information and freedom of the press, the right to fair trial, defense, and the integrity, efficiency, and confidentiality of investigation, as well as the principle of transparency. So this one goes into a little bit more detail and acknowledges the role of the media, acknowledges the importance of protecting key values in this expression of prosecutors. But it too does not, in my opinion at least, acknowledge this transformational change which has happened in the way communication is right now being carried out. And also, I don't think that those guidelines specifically had in mind the situations of a rule of law crisis. It's 2014. The situation in Poland is still good. Hungary is the one outlier of a widespread rule of law crisis, and still not to a degree it is today. So those guidelines have been elaborated by people who are mostly concerned with isolated incidents of issues with how prosecutors speak up. A situation that we will be talking about in a couple of judgments in a moment. But still not a widespread crisis, a crisis that we would see the executive and the legislative, and sometimes the judiciary, attack prosecutors or attempt to diminish their work or attempt to infringe on their independence. It's still coming from a different time, a easier, maybe more nice time, where we did not have many problems which we have today. And shows how those standards that we operate on remain relevant, but with caveats and with a necessity of taking into the account everything that has changed since. 2014 was a year where we already had Facebook, we already had Twitter, but they have still not transformed the society to a degree which they have done by now. We did not have TikTok and millions of teenagers addicted to TikTok. We still were in a situation where malicious actors outside of the European Union, and I'm particularly thinking of two countries to the east, have not been engaged to a such degree in attempting to undermine the EU and undermine the European system of values in an attempt to promote their own interests. So we were still in a better situation in many ways back then. Things have only gotten worse, unfortunately. So as far as judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, I wanted to bring to your attention three which you might or might not have heard about and have some relevance for prosecutors. And the first one is one of the building blocks of case law of the European Court of Human Rights on the freedom of expression of public servants. And it comes from Liechtenstein in the year 1999. I selected it also because we tend to associate the rule of law crisis and issues with Central and Eastern European countries and Balkan countries. And there is a persistent thought that these kinds of problems are limited to all those post-communist Eastern countries which still struggle to overcome the long shadow of totalitarianism and of have a poor rule of law culture and so on, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's very much true that some of the biggest issues with the rule of law currently we have are in the countries in the eastern side of the European Union, but not exclusively so. There have been significant problems in Western countries as well, which is what brought me to the case Wille versus Liechtenstein. So what happened here? Mr. Herbert Wille has been the minister in the Liechtenstein government, and the Liechtenstein government was at that time in a massive public discussion on various legal and organizational aspects concerned with joining the European Economic Area. Conducting the process which ended up with Liechtenstein being part of EEA and all of us being able to enjoy several freedoms that the European Union grants extending to Liechtenstein as well, having us able to enjoy Liechtenstein grants, which are financed by Liechtenstein, Norway, and Iceland. And many nice things came out of the process, but the process was very rocky. As part of this process, there was discussion on competencies and who gets to decide on what in the role of the court, Constitutional Court of the Liechtenstein. But this is beside the fact that what happened was that Mr. Wille, a member of government at the time, delivered a lecture at the university and where he expressed his views about what is the role of the Liechtenstein Constitutional Court in the whole situation. Basically, he spoke his mind about matters of constitutional law. His Serene Highness, the Prince, oh, I missed the Prince on the presentation, apologize. Prince of Liechtenstein didn't like this lecture very much. His Serene Highness, the Prince, issued a letter, which he, of course, made public. A letter which he addressed to Mr. Wille, which was, of course, very, Liechtenstein is ultimately a country of the German sphere of culture, so the letter was very polite and were very passive-aggressive. But the key of this letter was that the High Prince, who is the head of the state of Liechtenstein and who is the one who appoints, gives his final signature on several key decisions and appointments in the country, said, "In my eyes, your attitude, Dr. Wille," again, German field of culture, if somebody says a PhD, we have to make sure we bring this up even if we despise them. "Dr. Wille makes you unsuitable for public office. I do not intend to get involved in a long public or private debate with you, but I should like to inform you in good time that I shall not appoint you to a public office should you be proposed by the Diet, the Parliament of Liechtenstein, or any other body." Basically, the High Prince said, "I am never, ever going to appoint you to any public office from now on." And this is a situation which is different from many judgments that we spoke about and we will talk about, because it's a situation not where somebody had measures taken against them over their expression, but who were threatened in practice, who were given a advance warning that they will not be in the future considered for any governmental position. And of course, Mr. Wille tried to do what he can about this domestically, but there is no fighting the High Serene Prince in Liechtenstein. So you have to go outside and drive, fortunately not that far, to Strasbourg and take your case to the European Court of Human Rights. And Mr. Wille won before the European Court of Human Rights, because the European Court of Human Rights, first of all, in the most seminal part of this judgment, found that the speech expression of public servants is protected, and that whatever other considerations such as the fact that they are appointed by someone, a part of the government, do not constitute a blanket removal of this protection. Of course, a context needs to be taken into the account, and there have been a lot of further expressions by the European Court of Human Rights when exactly a public servant is exercising their freedom of expression. But the key finding was that, yes, Mr. Villa was entitled to protection under Article 10, freedom of expression. But more importantly, and for us, it also said that this protection extends to threats or declarations of future actions. And this is important because, as again, most of the other judgments concerning prosecutors speak about something that already happened. People have been disciplined, people have been removed from their position, people have had various court proceedings initiated against them. But this is a situation where nothing immediately happened to Mr. Villa. He remained in the government and he was not facing any court action. He merely had in his hand the letter from the High Sovereign Prince of Liechtenstein saying that I will never appoint you to anything and during my, probably life, most likely. So this is an important thing to keep in mind, which is frequently forgotten, because over the course of the rule of law crisis, we have seen several times members of the governments, members of higher ranks of the prosecution service express exactly these kind of statements in reaction to what the prosecutors have said, saying, you will be never promoted again. We heard people say, you will have court cases against you. I will sue you personally over this. We will never promote you to a higher station. It's over for you. And many such hanging threats have been hanging for quite a long time. I recently spoke to a Polish journalist who has been for over the course of 6 years threatened by the former Polish Minister of Justice, Prosecutor General Zbigniew Ziobro, who will return in this presentation later, that this journalist will be sued in a civil court over their publications. It never happened. 6 years passed. Mr. Ziobro is no longer the Prosecutor General / Minister of Justice, and this lawsuit never came. But it was hanging over the journalist. And this is exactly what been hanging over Mr. Villa. And that kind of action, an indefinite or definite future threat, constitutes violation of Article 10. And now we have to go to Romania because no presentation about prosecutors in the European Union is, I'm sorry, it's complete without certain Romanian tangent. But
sorry, we have one also for the judges.
Daniel, you have Daniel.
But I wanted to turn the attention not to the most famous European Court of Human Rights case of Mickowiecki, but instead turn to Mr. Bricht, a prosecutor who has been sanctioned for publishing a press release and giving a short television interview. What's important, he was the press officer of his prosecutor's office. So this was done as part of his duties as a press officer of the press officer. And of course, after this, he claimed that he was doing his job as a chief prosecutor at county level tasked with informing the public about pending criminal investigation, that he was merely stating the facts and he has been attacked over those statements of the facts. Of course, the disciplinary authorities disagreed and he was sanctioned. The European Court of Human Rights took up the case and found several interesting things, and I wanted to bring two elements to your attention. First of all, it said that the Article 10, freedom of expression, there is very limited scope for limiting. It's not the most linguistically elegant statement, but that's how the court has said, so I have to repeat this. Very little scope for limiting freedom of expression of matters on debate and public interests. That when public interest and public debate, that important matters for public interest are being debated, then the scope for narrowing this expression becomes much smaller than it would be when the conversation was about fish, weather, or events outside of the country. That when those public matters are being called into the light, then the space which is for the government to limit speech becomes far smaller. And this is because public debate on matters such as prosecution, judiciary, rule of law, human rights, and especially how those values are respected in the country, are of particular importance, and they cannot be treated as if it was conversation on some casual matters or matters of lesser importance. So the standard of protection of these individuals who speak up is thus higher than when they would be speaking about something else. And of course, the European Court of Human Rights finds a violation of Article 10, but there has been a fascinating dissenting opinion of two judges. The dissenting opinion of those two judges, those judges said that, of course, this situation was very not okay. What happened to Mr. Beast was wrong, and the government should not have done that, and his rights have been violated. We completely agree with these facts, we just disagree with the qualification of what happened. Those judges argued that Article 10 has not been violated because the applicant was doing his job as tasked with informing the public, and was stating facts and not expressing their opinions. And those two judges claimed in their dissenting opinion that the freedom of expression protects opinions. It protects what I think about some event. It does not protect me simply saying events happened. And this is a fascinating part of a larger discussion which has been taken for long in the European Court of Human Rights, what exactly is freedom of speech, what it protects, and what is the boundary between opinion and fact. But I think that all of us have at some point encountered someone who was trying to express their opinion, passing it on as a fact. In fact, us lawyers are experts at this. We are experts at presenting our opinions as facts. This is part of our job. We sometimes have to do this. Sometimes we have to say something without saying something openly. We're good at this. We're trained to do this very well. And so this boundary is not as clear as those two judges of the European Court of Human Rights would probably wish. And in particular in the context, it is a different situation where you state some facts in one context and a different situation where you state some facts in another context. The context was, of course, ongoing issues with corruption and with activities of the government in Romania. So just the statement of facts was still carrying by itself a weight in the public debate, because the prosecutor could have also not stated this and refrained from informing the public. And probably nothing would happen if he had done that. But the majority of judges disagreed with this dissenting opinion, obviously, and they said that statement of the facts is also protected. And especially when somebody is being attacked over stating facts. And when they are doing their job, they're exercising their duty as a prosecutor to inform the public about the state of investigations and the state of the case. This is also an element which is being protected. And the third odd case that I want to bring, and which is also a classic of the European Court of Human Rights freedom of expression jurisprudence when it comes to judges and prosecutors, is Kudeshkina versus Russia. The case is decided in 2009, but the case dates back to early 2000s. Context, early 2000s, Russia, President Putin is only slowly consolidating his powers, and the country is still in a strong grip of organized crime and various forms of corruption. As part of this, a prosecutor, Paweł Zajcev, and I will never get over how English language writes Slavic names, TS as C, that's always good mine. Anyway, Mr. Zajcev was investigating a case with links to high-level corruption in Russia. That was the time when prosecutors in Russia were still independent, and they could actually effectively try to chase after organized crime and after high-level corruption, which was reaching the highest levels of the government. And Prosecutor Zajcev had charges pressed against him by other prosecutors, a classic story of Russia at that time. And the case was overseen by Ms. Kudeshkina and, as a judge. And Ms. Kudeshkina quickly encountered influence coming both from senior prosecutors and coming from her superiors at the court, instructing her to handle this case in a particular manner. A classic attempt of influencing on judicial independence. The reaction of Ms. Kudeshkina was also in a way classic Russian one, because what she did was, first, she announced that she is going to run for the parliament, for Duma, and well, she wishes to do so to fight corruption and to fight attacks on independence of judiciary. But also she gave several high-profile interviews in the media where she criticized those who would attempt to influence her. What followed next was also a very classic Russian thing. She was simply removed from judiciary. This was not a case of a disciplinary action or not a case of some kind of sanctions that we saw in Hungary and Poland. She was simply removed from the profession and she is no longer a judge. And the European Court of Human Rights found a violation of Article 10, highlighting that a judge has a freedom to express their opinions about attempts to infringe on her independence. The European Court of Human Rights said also that it is a specific form of expression. Criticizing other judges and other prosecutors is a very specific situation, and particular attention has to be paid to what this criticism is, what is its aim and context, to establish whether this is a exercise of freedom of expression or undue attack on the others. This will come to us in a moment when we will talk about Judge Żurek. But also, most importantly, the European Court of Human Rights agreed it with Ms. Kudeshkina and disagreed it with the Russian government, and said that a judge is within their limit to talk about what's happening to prosecution and prosecution services. That they're both public servants, they are both professions of a specific legal status, and a judge in specific contexts and situations such as this is free to speak critically about what the prosecution is doing. Of course, as with every case before the European Court of Human Rights back then, Ms. Kudeshkina was not reinstated to her profession. She is no longer with the Russian judiciary. The only comfort being that back then there was still the time when the Russian Federation would actually pay the compensation ordered by the European Court of Human Rights. Now that they are out of the Council of Europe, this is unfortunately a story of past. And yes, very briefly about Kövesi versus Robenia, which I think that we know all very well, so I'm not going to sit on the details of this story. But I wanted to highlight one very important part of this ruling. The second paragraph is where the European Court of Human Rights spoke about the chilling effect on her, on other prosecutors and judges, in taking part in public debates on legislative reforms affecting the judiciary. This chilling effect threat in jurisprudence on public servant speech is relatively new. Chilling effect is a term which has been for a long time elaborated and used in the academic community and human rights advocates, but it only slowly started making its way into the courts. And this judgment was one of the first, and the first such high profile, where the European Court of Human Rights elaborated on the chilling effect and the danger it poses, even in the situations where, well, not the case with Ms. Kövesi, she was effectively, let's say, attacked by the government, but even in those cases where ultimately nothing wrong happens to this person in question, the chilling effect persists. If this existed, this line of thinking existed in 1999, probably the European Court of Human Rights would say the same about Mr. Wille, that the High Prince publishing such letters might have chilling effect on people in the government acting and speaking about public rights. Same about Ms. Kudeshkina, that what the Russian government is doing could have a chilling effect. Back then, this term did not exist. Now it's here, and fortunately it's being used by the court, but it's very important because it's an indirect effect, negative, on the freedom of expression, which might have significant impact even if ultimately the story of this one particular person has a good ending. With Ms. Kövesi, who is now the European prosecutor, the ending has been arguably very good. Her hard work has been recognized, and now she is charged with overseeing EPPO, now working hard with the Polish government, now that Poland is joining EPPO, and we will have European prosecutors. But the chilling effect exists, and the awareness that if I speak up against the government might go against me, so maybe I should not speak up. The awareness of this effect lasts far longer than the actual negative impact of the direct negative impact of on the person in question. And here we come to the Polish hero, Judge Żurek. I was long thinking about which photo to select. There have been multiple photos, including some provided by Jaras here, but I decided to go with a publicly available one. So, the Żurek versus Poland European Court of Human Rights. And this is the first of those cases that we talk about, which take place in the context of a long-standing systemic deep crisis of the rule of law in the country, and attacks against members of judiciary and prosecution, which have been ongoing and have developed into a pattern. Mr. Żurek, a judge, so mutatis mutandis very strongly in this situation, but there are a couple of things about which in the case of Judge Żurek need to be highlighted in the context of what prosecutors are doing as well. So, first of all, the European Court of Human Rights, in finding that Judge Żurek's freedom of expression has been infringed by the Polish authorities, which have reacted to his critical statements about the rule of law crisis, which he elaborated as both the spokesperson of the court and as a member of
National Council of Judiciary.
National Council of Judiciary and as a member of
Judicial Association Temis.
Judicial Association Temis. So several levels of Mr. Żurek's
Justitia also.
and also, see, Mr. Żurek was definitely a busy man who was doing many things at once. But all those things, all those functions he enjoyed, granted him a heightened level of protection because he was not a rank and file judge. He was a member of the National Council of Judiciary until he was dismissed in 2018, together with all the other judges, members of the council. He was a spokesperson. He was member of judicial associations, and all those high-profile public things led to the fact that his expression about the state of the rule of law in Poland had both more weight carried by thanks to his various functions, but also afforded him potential more protection. Of course, in the situation where actually he spoke, let's say, he exercised his freedom of expression properly. But this is what he did, and he spoke up about this crisis of the rule of law in Poland. So, heightened level of protection for those who have some special function, even within the judiciary and prosecution services. What other is that the European Court of Human Rights reiterated that it is a different thing for a judge, mutatis mutandis prosecutor, to speak about reforms and changes to the legal system in the country than it is to criticize the judiciary or its members and to criticize fellow judges, for example, claiming that they are corrupt or claiming that they violate the rule of law. And it is another thing to attack personally people, in particular other judges or prosecutors. And those scenarios have to be differentiated. So not only the position and the station of the person is important, but also the context and the goal of their expression. And since Judge Żurek was not criticizing personally other judges, he was not saying this judge is a bad person because they support or affirm what the government is doing. He did not say this person is a bad person because they joined the this or this function under the new government. He also was not criticizing the judiciary itself as a whole. He was not speaking about how the Polish judiciary is rotten or corrupt, or about how the Polish judges are of low quality. He was specifically talking about the reforms, or rather deforms, of the legal system in Poland, of the judiciary, damage to the constitutional system. And this level of protection is also heightened when these are matters that of high, let's say, level of importance due to the scope of the changes that are happening and due to the fact that what the public servant is protesting against is attempts to demolish the rule of law in the country. And finally, the most important part, which Mr. Bojarski spoke about yesterday, but I want to reiterate that this is the judgment in which the European Court of Human Rights said that the general right to freedom of expression of judges, mutatis mutandis prosecutors, to address matters concerning the functioning of the justice system might be transformed into a corresponding duty. This is the moment where the European Court of Human Rights, it does not yet say the prosecutors or judges have a duty to speak up. It says carefully that there are situations and contexts where the right might transform into duty. This is a process in thinking of the European Court of Human Rights that's being expressed here, I think. That there we might come one day at the point where the European Court of Human Rights will say that judges and prosecutors have the duty to speak up. So far, it's carefully saying that there might be a transformation, and this transformation happened in the case of Judge Jurek. His right to speak up became a duty owing to his functions, his role, and his prominence, and his tasks. His freedom to speak about what's happening in his country became more of a duty. So this is a transformational moment. It started 2 years ago. It will probably continue and will be very interesting to watch further judgments of the European Court of Human Rights to see whether at some point it might say outright that this is not as much of a freedom as much of a duty. Now we are coming to an end, so I wanted to briefly talk about freedom of association of prosecutors and their freedom to join various organizations. And we don't have judgments that would guide us here. So what I wanted is to throw out a couple of examples and possibly difficult situations concerning when and how can a prosecutor join some association and act within it. And the first element is one which is absolutely not mutatis mutandis, because this is something what judges can't do for the most part. They are barred from doing this under the Polish constitution, and I believe this is the case in vast majority of other jurisdictions as well. This is that prosecutors, unlike judges, can join trade unions. Do we have here somebody from outside of Poland, from a country where there exists a trade union of prosecutors? Or a trade union that allows prosecutors to join them? Poland is a yes?
Spain? No.
No.
I think they've got an association. Also in Romania there is one,
Mm-hmm.
but they're gathering only one. Also in Romania there is one, but they are gathering only 100 prosecutors, which is a very small percentage of the prosecutors active.
Okay, so maybe a little bit more special in this regard, but I've been trying to look whether prosecutors are expressively banned from joining trade unions, and in some of jurisdictions I saw they are not. So maybe it's a more matter of practice than law. But in Poland we have a trade union of prosecutors and employees of the prosecutor's office, and this is a classic trade union which is enjoying all the rights, protections, and controversies that surround trade unions, and has, as a trade union, a right to participate in various processes, in consultations with the government, in discussions on reform on the labor law. They have the right to organize various forms of protest. And this is something in general that judges cannot do. They barred from it under the Polish constitution. So participation of prosecutors in trade unions, yes, of course, if this is allowed by the law, let's say open road to that. But something to be mindful of, that in particular, if this is a situation where the prosecutors are joining not a trade union that is dedicated to prosecutors, as it's the case in Poland, but there are countries where prosecutors are joining more general trade unions, or for example, as it happens in the United States, where the prosecutors are joining trade unions that a catch-all for all kinds of lawyers, including practicing lawyers. And things become a little bit challenging, because all the time the prosecutors are still under a certain limitations and obligations as to how they can present themselves publicly, what they should be speaking up, and how should they act. I was trying to find whether there has been an example of a strike or a demonstration organized by a trade union that would have prosecutors present. I haven't found it, but this is not impossible. We can imagine a situation where, for example, some changes to conditions of work, salaries, would put prosecutors in such disadvantaged position that after having failed to negotiate with the government, having failed to exercise their right of collective bargaining peacefully, eventually they would take to the streets, literally. And that would be a very interesting situation, because for a rank and file, let's say, employee of the prosecution services, that's not a problem. But for a prosecutor to protest in such a way, I don't have a clear answer here and easy, but this is something what is definitely to be kept in mind, that when prosecutors join trade unions, they need to be aware of the various contexts in which those trade unions interact with the government, they interact with the public society, and will present themselves. An easier case are associations of prosecutors and lawyers. And here we have, in many countries, a very good practice of prosecutors joining associations, such as the one in Poland, Lex Supra Omnia, which represent their interests, which speak up about situations related to the prosecution services, which try to be the voice of the profession in the public. And in principle, this is a very good thing, but context and situations matter, because apart from the association Lex Supra Omnia in Poland, we also have the Independent Association of Prosecutors ad vocem. Ad vocem is a very specific, I would try to be diplomatic here, association. It's an association which exists in a certain context and does not exist in other contexts. It does not exist when Zbigniew Ziobro, the aforementioned Minister of Justice, previous Minister of Justice, Prosecutor General of Poland, is in power. Because when he is in power, then the members of this association, who are his friends, colleagues, dependents in, let's say, economic and professional sense, as in people who owe their career to advancement under his watch, when he is in power, they don't exist. As in, the association exists, but they don't speak up. They don't present publicly. They have very limited activity. They basically, at that time, they are working hard because they have been all promoted and they work in the top levels of the prosecutional services. When Mr. Ziobro exits power, then suddenly ad vocem springs to life. They have a new logo, very nice logo, flat, modern design, far better than the one of the trade union of the prosecutors. They have a website, they have a Twitter account which is extremely active and is continuously engaging in what I would call is very lively debate with other lawyers, prosecutors, judges, and officials in Poland. And suddenly they are everywhere, and they are presenting statements, opinions, they are demonstrating, they are in the media. They are very outspoken about what's happening, because from their perspective, the rule of law in Poland now is in danger. The prosecution services have been taken over by people who should not be doing this, and the Polish rule of law has to be defended. So the context is important, because I can imagine that I would be an international organization and I would want to organize a discussion about prosecution services in Poland, and I would issue an open invitation to associations and trade unions of prosecutors to contribute and to participate. And I will receive an email from Association ad vocem saying that yes, they will very gladly join this debate. They will send a representation of several members who will present the updates on the situation in Poland and how the rule of law in the country is in danger. Do they have the right to associate this way? Yes, they do. The principle of freedom of association is that as long as the association does not break the law or conduct illegal activity, we have to be fine with them being there and associating in this way. We might not like the fact that they are out there, and we might not like what we are doing, but this is the old challenge with human rights. We have to be accepting of the expression, association, assembly that we don't agree with. But of course, we have to know the context, and we have to know why exactly is this association operating and what is their modus operandi, to use Latin in a different way, and to be aware of the fact that they have a very specific goal, and this goal is not to represent the entirety of the Polish prosecution service. This goal is to represent a narrow slice of it as its interest. It is an interesting case because frequently we have situations where we encounter organizations which are known as GONGOs, government-operated non-governmental organizations. This is not a case of this. This is not something that's operated by the government. In fact, it only exists and acts because specific people are now in the government and other specific people are out of the government. It's a Schrodinger's association in a way. It exists and doesn't exist depending on who exactly is sitting on the chair of the Prosecutor General. But what we can do is that we can be aware of the context, and we can be aware of why exactly are those people currently active and what is their goal. And a particular challenge here comes, of course, for our friends abroad who are not following our public debates that closely, and there's absolutely no problem with that. You have your own public debates to follow. But the one in Poland has its strange quirks, and this is one of those quirks which we should be aware of. Now, a far more exciting question for me is, can a prosecutor join an organization such as Human Rights Watch or other NGO which is dealing with human rights, democracy, and the rule of law? This is a very difficult topic because, on the one hand, frequently, if you look at the law, this is not something that prosecutors are forbidden from. The law would say, like it does in Poland, that the prosecutors should be basically ensuring that their public activity, membership in organization, and so on, does not infringe on their responsibilities, duties, and tasks, and does not compromise their role as a prosecutor. Joining an organization such as Human Rights or Watch or Amnesty International on the surface does not infringe on that. But the thing is that those organizations speak up. They are active in the public debate, and they frequently criticize the government and speak on matters related to prosecution, judiciary, and they, in a way, strengthen themselves by their membership. They are able to say that we have that many members in the country, we are supported by those people, and this is giving us the standing and strength in the public debate. Whether a prosecutor is right to be part of such an organization, in such a situation, it very much depends on the context, and certainly it gets more difficult if, for example, a prosecutor would seek to be more active and, for example, to speak up on behalf of such an organization and to participate in this. This is becoming a little bit complicated, and in particular, the broader context is also important. Sometimes those organizations are domestic, and they have a very neutral agenda, which is to strengthen and protect democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Sometimes they are international, and sometimes they have a more specific profile, which is to protect and defend human rights and the rule of law, but from, say, a more liberal or more conservative or more left-wing, right-wing perspective. This is all making it more and more tricky. And despite the fact that democratic organizations such as mine proclaim that they are fully independent and absolutely impartial, we never fully are. We always have some biases. And we, for example, have to begin with the bias of being European and subscribing to a very European vision of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. For us, it's natural and obvious, but outside of Europe, and in particular in some regional contexts, this is not what is being practiced and respected there, and our approach would be quickly called out as European, maybe colonial even, although for people from Central and Eastern Europe, this argument sounds a little bit weird, but that's what we will hear because we are white and we are from Europe. So this is an association which springs to the mind immediately. Now this is joining such organizations and being active with them, if law allows for this, it's tricky and challenging. And this is very much a challenge for individual prosecutors to balance this and to ensure that they do not, not only themselves as being members of those organizations do not cross certain lines, but also that they will be not seen from outside as crossing lines merely by joining these organizations and merely by being their members, especially if those organizations engage heavily in the public debate and in particular advocacy in the given country. And finally, last item, we are running out of time, associations unrelated to prosecution and law. Again, in most jurisdictions, a prosecutor would be free to join an association or some kind of assembly which has nothing to do with law, public debate, and everything related to the rule of law. A fishing club, a board game club, a sports association. Unless the law explicitly says that no, they are forbidden from joining any associations, prosecutors are free to do that. And I say they should be doing that because limiting yourself too heavily owing to your profession is never good for your mental health. But again, there might be occasional situations where this might cause some controversy or trouble. I'm running out of time, so I won't do a hypothetical, but I will just briefly describe it. It's a story about an American judge, so mutatis mutandis, prosecutor, who had a very stellar career as a lawyer and then a judge, American model, so judges become, lawyers become judges. But he had also a dark second life. He was still a great fan of role-playing and board games, and he was very active in the community of fans of those games and designers, because he himself, in his spare time, would write fiction, would write material for these games. He was not making it a business, he was doing it purely as a hobby, but still under the guise of Orcus the Necromancer, because that's what he was presenting himself, he would actively participate in discussion, and he would argue with people that the zombies should have +4 to attack and not +6. This is what Mr. Peterson, Clark Peterson, American judge, was doing. And if he was just doing it in his spare time, that would be half of a problem. But there came a day where he was hearing over a case, and one of the plaintiff in this case contacted the disciplinary officer at Peterson's court and claimed that there has been a breach of disciplinary standards, because Mr. Peterson, first of all, he has a double life. He is not an upstanding American judge. He moonlights as a geek who is appearing on the internet under a pseudonym of Orcus the Necromancer, and he is discussing games with people. This is not becoming of a judge. A judge should not be doing that. Argument number one. Argument number two, Mr. Peterson, in this context, is aggressively arguing with people and is expressing him in a way which is unbecoming a judge, because he is expressing his opinions, he is arguing with people, and he is generally very fighty on the internet and aggressive in defending his opinions. Again, unbecoming of a judge. And third and biggest problem, objectively, was that the plaintiff presented screenshots of internet forum posts by Mr. Peterson, Orcus the Necromancer, clearly indicating that those posts, they had timestamps, so it was visible that they have been made during working hours, including during working hours in a day when Judge Peterson was hearing the case. So just before the hearing in the courtroom, he was sitting in his office, and when everybody was assuming that Judge Peterson is now going through the case files and coming up with his reasoning for his decision, Judge Peterson, as Orcus the Necromancer, was busy engaging in a discussion on fantasy games. The disciplinary officer carried out an investigation and concluded it, saying that Mr. Peterson is a judge with an absolutely spotless career in American, first as attorney and first as a lawyer, then as a judge. First. Second, Mr. Peterson is free to enjoy in his spare time his hobbies, and is free to do that as long as this way he engages with the public does not give way to a suspicion that he might not be independent, that he might be letting his career as Orcus the Necromancer influence his reasoning as a judge and his activities as Judge Clark Peterson. And having browsed all those forum posts and discussions, the disciplinary officer had found no evidence that, for example, Judge Peterson, posing as Orcus the Necromancer, would reveal any private information or would comment on the case or would in any way engage in a way which would be unbecoming of a judge. And thus no further disciplinary actions were taken, although it was quickly noticed by people who would engage with Orcus the Necromancer that he significantly scaled down his activity in the hobby, and stopped posting during working hours and in general kind of retreated. So what I think that happened was the disciplinary officer came to him and said, look, you're a great judge and everybody values your work and everybody here likes you. And I'm fine with what you're doing. And I'm going to say this publicly, but privately, please drop your working hours activity that would lead to people possibly coming to me with this kind of claims, and it will be all fine. And that's how the story ended. But it is a great example of these various contexts and those boundaries that are sometimes easy. In this case, fortunately for Judge Peterson, they were quite easy to draw the line between his activity as a judge and his activity as Orcus the Necromancer. But when it comes to even actions and associations and expressions unrelated to legal profession, unrelated to judiciary, can sometimes be problematic, and it is important to ensure that if you lead this kind of double life, that the barrier between this and your professional life is quite tight and nothing comes through. I have already overstepped my time heavily, so I'd like to thank you very much. I hope that some of those stories, examples, and various lines of thinking on the freedom of expression and association will be useful for you and will be give you some food for thought. I will be more than happy to, maybe you can bring up this last slide again.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So just the last slide. Jeszcze raz. Udostępniam.
So we will try to bring up the slide with my contact details, but if you want to know more about what my organization is doing with the rule of law, feel free to contact me. And I hope that this is the beginning of more meetings and opportunities to engage with prosecutors and to talk about what is your role. Thank you very much. What your role in expressing yourself and associating yourself in a way which on the one hand helps strengthen the rule of law and on the other hand won't get anybody in any sort of trouble. So once again, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope you will have a great rest of the day in Warsaw.
Okay, so, well, my idea is just now to have, 5 minutes for questions, comments to amazing presentation by Jakub, especially with this orcs and necromants and just second life of lawyers, especially judges and prosecutors. I just don't insist on anyone just to confess about his or her second life, but why not? So, 5 minutes to discuss these issues. If there are any questions, thoughts, comments. Karolina, floor is yours.
Okay. So I will be speaking more after the break. Just one comment from my previous life. More than 12 years ago, I was a assistant prosecutor in one of the prosecutor offices in my hometown, Wrocław, Breslau. And the first thing, on the first day, it was the 2nd of January, 2009, when I came to the office, the first thing that my boss has told me, she was telling me, remember, you have Polish prosecutors, for those of you who don't know it, Polish prosecutors, we have to go to the crime scene and also attend the autopsies. So I had, of course, I was new, so they gave me I was on call for the whole night, and the first thing that they told me, that I should not speak freely to the journalists if they will be calling me regarding the case. I should be always referring the journalists or anyone who wants to speak to me about the cases to the spokesperson or the head of the office. And this is the golden rule: never ever speak to the journalists, because I don't know what would happen if I have spoken to them. So this is my, I would say maybe not most traumatic experience from my life in the office, but especially in this context, it shows how deeply it is rooted in our, I would say, prosecutorial culture in Poland, that we are not about to engage. And of course, it was in 2009, so it was far before what is happening right now.
Yes, this is an experience of many judges and prosecutors in Poland, and there have been a long journey that those two professions have been undertaking over the last 8 years, which have resulted in some shifts and changes, and very positive shifts and changes in how both judges and prosecutors engage with the public. And this paradigm that the only way the judge and the prosecutor is entitled to express themselves is through their decisions, and that they should be these I'll never forget how one judge described it to me, those black obelisks that don't have even a face, that only speak through their judgments, and this is the only correct way of interacting with the outside world. This is changing. I don't know, I wasn't at the beginning, so I don't know if there was anything said about how much the gentleman on the left of me, back when he was in the judiciary, has done wonderful work in trying to change this. And he was one of the judges who started a sort of a mental revolution which is ongoing in the Polish judiciary about how judges should present themselves and how they should express themselves. And things have gotten significantly better in terms of engagement of public servants in general, and judges and prosecutors in particular, but there is still a very long way to go. Some judges and prosecutors have adopted a more modern stance, some are still clinging on to those older, like Karolina's situation, approaches. Some are transforming, like Prosecutor Borek, who, as he said himself in this hearing, has recently only came to a conclusion that this old approach is no longer relevant. So this is an ongoing road, which is full of challenges, and there will be mistakes along the way. There will be mistakes of engaging too much. There will be mistakes of overusing the communication channels and stepping out of a role of somebody who is speaking up in important cases about the rule of law and about the situation, and transforming into a pundit who is commenting on everything and basically is more of a freelance journalist and less of a judge of a prosecutor. So there are perils and challenges, but I think that in Poland and in the region we are on a rocky but correct way to kind of shift the thinking about judiciary. But there's still a lot of work to be done, certainly.
So I think that's the amazing conclusion of the first session, which is the part of the first session.